If you take the names, the first names of the people on the next panel, you can make an anagram sentence, but just barely. So Amy, Miranda, Robert, Eve, Hai-Ting, and Brian becomes I hit a bear, avenge my arm, Brit, or Din. Please welcome Amy Davis Roth, Miranda Celeste Hale, Robert Blaskiewicz, Eve Siebert, Hai-Ting Chinn, and Brian Thompson. We got Skepticism and the Humanities.
Hello, everybody. Oh, we didn't assign seats beforehand, and I was hoping there would be a fight, but apparently not. Hi, I'm Brian Thompson. I am the outreach coordinator for the James Randi Educational Foundation, and this is a panel on skepticism and the humanities. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things, so we'll get started pretty quickly. Just so you know, I woke up this morning feeling completely upside down after the festivities of last night. So I'm wearing my Australian Skeptics, Victoria Skeptics t-shirt, and actually now I feel right side up. Do you get it? This is the quality of jokes you're going to get this early in the morning. Thank you. I'm hearing mumbles of support from these people. So let's just go down the row and everybody can introduce themselves. Let's start with Amy.
Hi everyone, I am Amy Davis Roth. A lot of you know me as Surly Amy. I write for skeptic.org. Thanks for the 5 supporters out there. I'm also the managing editor for madartlab.com, which is a blog about the intersection between art, science, skepticism, and geek culture. And I'm the creator of Surly Ramics. Thanks, guys.
I'm actually going now because she's got a special introduction.
Oh, of course, yes.
I'm Miranda Celeste Hale. I am
Like,
oh, how do I do it?
is it?
A little bit closer. Okay. I'm Miranda Celeste Hale. I'm an English teacher. I teach primarily rhetoric and composition courses at the community college level. And I tend to focus on applying those skills to skeptical activism. And I guess that's the relevant part. This panel. Thank you.
I'm Eve Siebert. I'm also an English teacher. I have a PhD in English literature, specifically Old English, Middle English, Old Norse, and Shakespeare, because something fun and modern. I blog at skepticalhumanities.com. I'm interested in things like creationist interpretations of Beowulf, which you'll be surprised to learn are wrong. And I'm actually wearing, this is a Grendel's skull. Amy might not have realized this, but...
Yeah, I have no idea what I do, you guys. So.
Because it turns out Grendel was a
these
dinosaur. And yeah, anyway, next.
I'm Bob Blaskiewicz. I'm a postdoc in the Writing and Communication program at Georgia Tech for about 2 more weeks. Then I'll be going to Wisconsin, where I'll take up a visiting assistant professorship. I'm also at Skeptical Humanities. My PhD is in American literature and rhetoric and composition. My dissertation was on the World War II veterans' writings, both memoir and fiction. And I teach a number of classes that take as their subject extraordinary claims, giving students the opportunity to write about these topics and to research these topics on their own.
Science. Science. You don't have to believe in it. For it to be true. My name is Hai-Ting. I am an opera singer by trade. That song had lyrics by Surly Amy. You can buy them on a not on a beer bottle, but on a necklace. I mean, I suppose if someone wants to buy this beer bottle,
That's actually a good idea.
yeah,
I might work that in.
We will
Collector's item now.
donate the proceeds to the JREF.
Yeah.
That music was written by my partner in crime, Matthew Schickley, who is out there somewhere, last night at about 2 a.m. Right, I am Hai-Ting Chinn. I am an opera singer. I podcast with Matthew Schickley, the Scopes Monkey Choir, which is a podcast about Scopes Monkey Choir, which is about it is the podcast where music and sound meet science and skepticism. And I have an ongoing show that I'm calling Science Fair, which is science texts and writings by scientists set to music and staged with demonstrations.
Excellent. And it was pretty embarrassing too, because just before this panel, Hai-Ting and I were talking about what she was going to do, and it turns out we were going to be singing the exact same song. So
It's awkward. Go ahead, Brian.
I just decided instead I would sing Poison's Every Rose Has Its Thorn. Speaking of wonderful art, let's get some definitions out of the way before we get started with the meat of the panel. I don't know if everybody here even knows exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about the humanities, to paraphrase Raymond Carver. So, Bob, do you want to handle just explaining to us what exactly we are talking about here when we say humanities?
Well, when I think of the humanities, the definition is a little fluid, as these things often are. But it's a variety of disciplines that have to do with, communication and meaning, often, including, literature and languages and linguistics, philology, cultural anthropology, depending on your definition of the social sciences, the fine arts, history. Theology is a legitimate area of study. Apologetics, but theology is interdisciplinary. And then there are area studies that are also incorporated under the umbrella name of the humanities, including things like gender studies, American studies, eco-criticism. Communication studies, folklore, and classics. And some people go so far as to include things like law underneath the umbrella of the humanities.
So it's not just a bunch of people sitting around talking about just a bunch of nonsense. It's actually an academic field of study with expertise.
Right, yeah, and that's one of the things that it can be kind of frustrating. I mean, there seems to be a sort of divide, and I know that Miranda will talk about this, but there seems to be a sort of divide between at least a mutual misunderstanding about what the sciences are doing and what the humanities are doing. We don't really communicate as much as we really ought to, because we share a lot of similar goals and enthusiasms, really. But do you want to talk about that, Miranda?
Sure. This is, am I doing this right? Okay. Well, we had actually had this discussion during our preparation time about how it is interesting that the critical thinking skills are often taught in the humanities courses more than they are taught in science courses. So we can often take that as a valuable thing from humanities in the academic world, at least. And as Bob says, humanities has a very broad definition, which can be both a good thing and a bad thing, because as you try to explain it, it is difficult to narrow it down. Yet it is nice to have this sort of big umbrella, because we can say these things are valuable too, these things are worth studying, and they provide us with skills that we can apply to skepticism in a way that science does too. So it's complementary, but different. I would say some parts of the humanities, some humanities courses are, and subjects are a little more pragmatic than others. And I tend to prefer that, especially when we're talking about the context of skepticism and how one can apply those skills and that subject matter to communicate effectively, to inform, and to a large extent to persuade. It gets into the teaching how to think, not what to think, which is a cliche, but it's very important, I think, especially in the humanities, perhaps. And so I suppose I'm also here getting into the justification of why, because Bob and I had previously talked about, do we need to, it sounds weird, but defend, was that the word?
Possibly defend the humanities.
Defend the humanities, like their battle. But yeah, it's a little bit of a justification, I suppose, for why these things are relevant to why we're here. And
are you going to call out Lawrence Krauss?
no, I'll let you do that. You're better at that.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm just saying, I appreciate that you brought up that, or you or Eve brought up that thing during the during our preparation, that critical thinking skills are often. Sorry, I'm sorry. Got it. Critical thinking skills are often more prominent in humanities courses than in science courses. And that is, I suppose, ironic, but it isn't to denigrate the science courses by any means. I just believe they're complementary and both can provide with similar skills.
No, I think you've contributed to this turf war.
Yeah, we're gonna throw down.
Yeah. Oh God, we're gonna lose so horribly because they've got rockets and stuff.
We have words and pictures and stuff.
Yeah. We can paper cut you.
I can make the ceramics for on the rockets, so we can work together, you guys. It's okay. Bridge building.
Brian has rockets.
Okay, fine. We'll work this out later. Look. A lot of people do think that there is this hard line divide between the right brain and the left brain. So I want to talk about how you apply these critical thinking skills to
Critical
what
drinking,
you guys do.
Brian?
What?
Did you just say critical drinking?
Critical.
I'm sure that you said critical drinking.
How late were you out last night, Brian?
We've all been drinking critically.
I will.
Well, okay. Well, first I want to just sort of set the stage here because we do have this kind of. We have two people here who are artists and creators, and we've got the rest of the panel is more on the academic side and the study side, and the two aren't mutually exclusive. But I do want to talk about how you approach things from both the practical creation side of art, and then how you approach critical thinking from the teaching and the study. So, Amy, Hai-Ting, how do you apply critical thinking to what you both do?
Well, this is a topic that comes up a lot, especially with the blog that I write for, Mad Art Lab. Artists sort of have a reputation for being spacey, hippie, pot-smoking, lazy, people that aren't really interested in the rational side of things. But when you really break down the creative process, it's very similar to the scientific method. Artists will take materials that they have available to them, sort of like the available data that you would have if you were in a scientific setting. You then come up with a hypothesis as to what you could perhaps make with that data or those materials. Then you do your experiments in your lab, which is your art studio, and you come up with something. Maybe it's something wonderful, maybe it's something ugly. You base it, you know, how does it compare to what I thought it was going to be? And then you release that out into the world, and it's up for peer review. So the rest of you and other artists get to peer review our work. So I think that science and art are very, very similar in the process side of it.
I like the word that you use, lab.
I want to add, however, the corollary to this lyric that you wrote, science, you don't have to believe in it for it to be true. I would say that the art version is art. It don't have to be true for you to believe in it. The part of the point of art is it's where we don't have to be rational and critical. In fact, it's great sometimes for us not to be, and even as skeptics, we can let ourselves go in that arena. We don't have to worry about whether it is true. We can keep that part of our mind going if we want or not, but in the art world, we can just feel, we can just experience, we can share it with our friends. We're released from the obligation for it to approach truth. And if it happens to approach some kind of emotional truth, sorry, I don't that's great for the artist and for the experiencer, but it's not necessary. And it's really also, not necessary for art that the artist be critical or rational or anything. It's not necessary, it's possible.
Well, that's interesting because, I mean, art is subjective to a certain extent, but when you talk about bad art, there's an example that I think everybody probably here can relate to, hotel room paintings.
Do we all have the same ones here, too?
Probably. It's just a bunch of horses.
But see how that's community building? We're all having similar experiences with that art. So even though it's bad art, all of us can take something out of that. It might be humor. It might be the fact that we all have that art.
True.
So I think it still
has
meaning.
I think that maybe, and I want to get your feedback on this because I'm probably wrong, but I think that, that maybe one of the primary criteria for bad art is a certain sense of untruth or dishonesty about it. So for example, with hotel room art, you look at it and it's just kind of, it's competent, it gets the job done, although I don't know why my painting in my hotel room has a horse that appears to be lying down dead, except he has one head up.
We all have
They're all the same.
Yeah, it's very strange. But on the other hand, it seems to be done with sort of the cynical, bare minimum, like this was done not necessarily because of any sort of passion to relay any kind of truth that the artist was really feeling. It was done because these were the colors that were asked for in the hotel room. So do you think that there is anything to that, that the sort of the critical thinking, the science-minded people are in search of truth, and art maybe is also in search of truth, or at least the best kinds of art? Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
Art cannot show you, art cannot teach you truth. I have a director friend of mine who's fond of saying, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union. If you already know what the message is, you can find it in the art and it can be reinforced by the art. If you are curious about some message that you don't understand, you also might be sort of tweaked into thinking about it by the art. But the point of art is not to instruct on facts or to search for deeper truths. Science is about trying to figure out how our human senses are fooling us and what is beyond what our human senses can perceive and how they're fooled. Art is about reveling in our human senses and the way they fool us and the beauty that comes out of the fooling us, the stories that our brains tell us, some of which are ridiculous and not true, but are really fun to think about. That's the domain of art.
And again, I just want to reinforce, there's sort of this idea that the artist is dead. Once I create a piece of art, or anyone else creates a piece of art, or whoever the person is that created the ugly horse art that is in the hotel rooms, whatever their intention was, and it could have been for that to be the most beautiful reference to their pony named Sugar that they loved so much. Whatever their intention is sort of irrelevant once the art is placed in front of you. So it's up to you to decide what that meaning is.
So Bob and Eve and Miranda, how do you apply critical thinking to the study of the humanities? But even more than that, how does critical thinking make you a better scholar in the humanities?
Well, I think critical thinking is necessary to any academic form because, well, you just have bibble otherwise. We look for evidence. We come to conclusions based on evidence, and we make an argument based on, and then present the evidence to support our arguments. In English literature or literature generally, you know, the text to a large extent is the primary source of evidence, but also historical, contextual evidence, and textual evidence for medievalists, because, you know, manuscripts and stuff. In the humanities, there isn't, like, you know, a one answer that's sort of correct necessarily. So you can have two different, quite opposing points of view about, say, Hamlet, because there are at least two different, as I understand it, points of view about Hamlet. But it's still valid as long as you are presenting evidence that's valid. I remember the first time I taught a literature class, and I told my students, you know, because papers, they don't really like writing them, it turns out.
No way.
And I said, well, you know, there's no right answer. And then I started grading the papers, and then I've revised that to, there are wrong answers. There is no single right answer, but there can definitely be wrong answers. If you're saying something that's directly contradicted by the evidence, then that's probably not so much correct. Or if you're just apparently have made up your own story. Because I've had that students go, well, maybe Rip Van Winkle's wife with, well, maybe, but that's just a different story. And it's great, and go ahead and write that story, but not for this paper that's an analysis of the story.
You know, there's another thing that I realized early on in teaching writing classes. I had a student, this was like, you know, it was my first day as a graduate student teaching a college level class, and I was all fun. I was wearing a suit and everything, and, you know, all respectable. I ditched the backpack for the computer bag,
and long pants and everything.
Long pants, yeah.
And that propeller beanie.
And I showed up in full academic regalia, and it was the damnedest thing. But I had a student who kind of, after I read the syllabus, I was clutching it really tight and trying to power through it. And at the end of that, he said, oh, I thought this was going to be a creative writing class, where it's a research class. And I stopped for a second. It's like, but all writing is creative, you know, that there isn't, the analytical side and the creative side are joined perfectly in these writing classes. So yeah.
Well, we had a friend who at some point got frustrated with her dissertation and had decided she was going to write a dissertation haiku. I believe the committee didn't really go for that, though.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me sad.
A dissertation tweet.
But how long would a haiku have to be a dissertation?
Hamlet was mad.
That was her plan.
I think you meant just
Hashtag
a really
TAM
long
2012.
haiku.
Well, the dissertation was only 3 lines long, but there was a 500-page bibliography.
Footnotes.
Footnotes.
Mostly
were amazing.
footnotes.
Well, the can I do just a little bit on this question?
Sure,
Still,
yeah.
okay. I like that we discussed the pedagogical aspects of how critical thinking affects the humanities and has a relationship to it. I think that those pedagogical skills, teaching skills, are completely transferable outside of the classroom too. And that's what makes it relevant to what we're talking about here, because we get to get out of the academic world, and which can be very boring on occasion and insular, and we get to take it out and use those skills that we have in perhaps a more practical manner, where we're not just assigning papers and about Hamlet or haiku, and instead we are using the skills that we teach about how to find sources, evaluate their quality, use them to support your arguments. That's often a thing with students. They do not want to support their arguments with evidence. They just want to say, I believe it, therefore it is true. And that isn't how it works. And so that can be a very hard thing to overcome. So once we can sort of help students in the classroom to learn that they do need to support their actual assertions with good quality evidence, I think that's very relevant to skepticism.
Good evidence? They don't like that part either.
Well, what do you mean by good, though?
You know, it's like, well, here's my opinion, and look, the Google agrees with me.
Or Wikipedia, which I love, but I always have to explain that it isn't necessarily the most trustworthy source. But anyway, I just mean that we can transfer those skills to skepticism in the sense that we can communicate how important it is to support our assertions with evidence outside of just writing papers, but whoever our audience is and whatever our goal and objectives are. So go ahead.
And I think communication is one of the primary goals of anybody who's a good skeptic.
Yes.
I mean, what it means to be a skeptic, at least in the way that we are here, we've come to a gathering of fellow skeptics. We're not just sitting at home just thinking to ourselves, you know what, I think evolution is true. We are interested in communicating that idea
Being active.
and helping people who are being harmed by false beliefs.
And that's the one thing that even though that we have practicing artists and their severest critics together on the same panel, the one thing that
Bob, don't start a war.
I don't know. I heard him saying that song sucked. I'm not trying to cause any trouble or anything.
I feel like
he was
there's going to be a war today.
She's the only one with a glass bottle.
It didn't suck, it blew.
I wouldn't mess with her, Bob.
That's the one thing that we all have in common, is that we're all communicators, and that's one of the fundamental principles behind the humanities, is that we are trying to understand one another better, understand like the cultural products and artifacts that people have produced. We put ourselves inside someone else's head when we're reading a novel. We try to understand what was daily life like during the Renaissance. Kind of to go back to what Michael Shermer was saying on the first day, these are ways of practicing expanding our sympathy for our fellow humans, and to celebrate what we're capable of doing, and that's very important.
And I want to bring it home a little bit, this message of what visual art, what performance art, what the humanities in general, how we as this community use it. Just a few examples that come to my head. Phil Plait, we're all pretty much familiar with him. I don't know if you follow him on Facebook or Twitter or Google+, but he is absolutely amazing at what I think is an accident that he does. He posts these gorgeous photos of the cosmos, and it draws you into his conversation. Suddenly, you can understand what he's talking about when he's discussing black holes or other phenomenon. Scott Sigler, you may be familiar with him. He's a best-selling horror author, but what he does with his characters is he He has skeptical characters that use real science in his books. That helps to communicate that. Tim Minchin, hello, right? What about his beat poem? I mean, that probably taught more people about, you know, the problems with alternative medicine than any argument that I've heard. Our beloved George Hrab knows, he knows how well he can get a jingle to stick in your head so you'll remember a bit of science. I think that there's a lot of ways that we can practically apply, you know, the sort of wishy-washy ideas of performance and visual art to express, you know, what we're trying to tell a larger audience about critical thinking.
And we were talking earlier about the idea that art is often a way of recognizing your tribe. That you hear the music, you sing it together, you see the jewelry or the clothes, you make a reference to a movie, and in our modern world where we're choosing our tribes, we have many, but it's a way of bringing ourselves together, recognizing each other, a shorthand for all kinds of things that we know we have in common, and a way of reinforcing that and making us feel a certain kind of common humanity. And I think it's really important that people, when you recognize some art or artist that you like, that you support that person, not just with enjoying their art, but this is weird, but financially, because a lot of, you buy the CD, go to the show, a lot of art has been commissioned and paid for by people that we do not agree with over the millennia. The church, for instance. I spend a lot of time singing for the Episcopal Church because they have an institution, they have a repertoire, they have money to pay me. I talked to a really nice visual artist last night who makes inspirational Christian art because people buy it. So if you want art that supports your worldview, go out and support it the way to show that you want that worldview represented.
Yeah.
Buy Surly Amy's.
Or the pony guy that made the paintings in the hotel room.
Yes. And the pony guy, we should support him. I mean, he really loved sugar, and you know that horse had a good life.
I think he's sold enough paintings.
Yeah, I think he was probably supported by this hotel.
He's
really
really
just
rich.
like a crowbar and like eyeglasses screwdriver, you can get those right off.
Brian, did you make those paintings?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly that the scientific-minded and skeptical-minded artists are rather rare. But I know for a fact that there's at least 5 people out in this audience right now that are skeptical-minded artists.
I would raise that to
I'm hoping
20.
there's more. There's 6 now. There's a gentleman in the front. He's great. But yeah, we need to show that we appreciate this art and that we're trying to build a community, and that will then build a bigger community. So support even the artists that haven't made anything yet, and tell them to put their stuff out there, because we need you guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, especially in this era of the internet where it's so easy to spread the word about something. A lot of people, I think, mistake spreading the word for support. And it's great when you can like a Facebook page or tweet about, you should go check this thing out, but you're actually contributing.
Hit a donate button if there's one there. Buy a CD. Ask if you can buy a painting or a sketch. This sounds so mercenary, but when I think about all the money that's being given to artists to make art to support a worldview, to reinforce, to legitimize worldviews that they don't believe in, it makes me mad, because somehow, I'll leave this to the experts, for some reason art is powerful, it touches us, it moves us, and we would love to use it to move us in the right direction, to move humanity in the right direction, instead of some of the ones that it has moved in for the last 6,000 years.
Do you think that there is a quality trap, though? And what I mean by that is, I was raised Southern Baptist, and when you go to church a lot, you see a lot of movies made by the church. You see a lot of puppet shows. For some reason, we're really big in the Southern Baptist circuit.
I love puppets.
you see all these things, and everybody watches them, and everybody says that they like them. But if you judge them based on sort of the prevailing standards of that form of art, you know, if you're an academic, then you understand that there are certain objective criteria you can judge a subjective thing like art by. So, for example, I don't know if anybody else has seen the Kirk Cameron film Fireproof.
Yes.
Which is about how a guy uses Jesus to help him not be a jerk to his wife.
What?
Yeah, and I don't want to get into it.
That's some good art.
The point is that it's just, not only is it not a good movie in its messaging, it's poorly made. It's from objective standards, like the lighting is bad, the editing is bad, but the people who that movie is made for love it. Do you think that there is a risk in the critical thinking in the science community of us falling into that same trap, where we will spread something because we agree with the message, but it's not necessarily something that's of the quality to appeal to outsiders?
Listen, there's a lot of bad art in the world.
Yeah.
There is inevitably a lot of bad art about all kinds of things and about nothing at all. But the more art that there's so much bad music that was written during Bach's time. But what do we remember? We remember Bach, and we only got Bach because there were
so much
1,001 horrible composers writing for the Lutheran Church. And what I'm saying is support everything. If you like it, especially, consume it, support it, spread it around, pay for it. If you don't like it, you know, it's there, and it's part of the morass. It's part of there are 7 billion people on the planet. There's people like all kinds of art. Some people like those horse paintings on the wall. There's art for everybody. The more art there is about something, the more chance we have that there will be good art about it.
Yeah, I was on a panel last week at Convergence at Skepticon, sorry. And one of the panelists named Ryan brought up a really good point, that when he first started making art, he made really ugly art. And he just started putting it out there, and he found other people that made really ugly art. And they got together, and they became friends, and they encouraged each other. And then as time went on, they made beautiful art. So I still think that it's important that we encourage people, especially in such a small community that we have. We need to be supportive of the arts, and we need to encourage people, you know what, make ugly art, write a bad song, go out there, do it, keep doing it. Same with podcasts, it's like anything. The first few things you're gonna come out with, they might not be fantastic, but if you have good intentions and a good message that you're trying to share, you should keep at it. You know?
But this is also why I say, if you like it, support it. Because
Right.
that's, you know, putting your support behind, hopefully, raising up the better stuff.
Yeah, you don't have to buy the ugly art, but just say, good job. keep at that, you know, keep it up. Yeah.
That's a really good effort.
I don't know.
Sometimes good.
Sometimes, I mean, I like what you said about there being lots of wrong answers.
Yeah.
You can say, sometimes you're allowed to say, that's horrible, I don't like it. That has nothing to do with
There
science
should be a
or
Facebook button
this
that's
kind
just
of
like
critical
condescending compliment.
I love that.
Should be a maybe button.
Condescending compliment.
Once
You
one of
really
my
made something there.
one of my students asked me what BARF meant in the margin of their paper, and it said I threw up a little when I read this. Yeah.
Do you actually write that in your papers?
Barf? Yeah,
do?
I have.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I actually barf on them. Just occasionally.
Yeah.
Right, that.
Well, no matter what we do, whether you're an artist or a scientist or a construction worker, if you're here, you're interested in getting to the bottom of reality, promoting a reality-based viewpoint of the world, and learning as much as we can about what's really going on in the natural world. So let's just start with Miranda, but anybody can jump in later. What do the humanities teach us about reality that traditional science education does not?
Well, I don't know if we're necessarily all on the same page about this, but probably pretty similar. I don't honestly think that the humanities do teach us anything that science doesn't, but it gives us the skills that can help us to think about things that have been discovered empirically and rationally and with evidence and that have gone through testing, and we can say something like peer review, and Amy has used that very broadly, which is good. We can peer review anything, basically. It goes back to The Two Cultures by C.P. Snow from the late 50s, which probably just stirred up more controversy than anything else with the division of humanities and science. But honestly, I don't think that science or the humanities can necessarily teach us anything that isn't already out there, but we can use our tools to help people to discuss it and to spread the messages, not just science messages, but whatever it is that is already, but I'm using a very broad definition of science here too, obviously. I don't know what would the word be for what I'm talking about, I guess, or empiricism, perhaps?
No.
I don't know.
One of the things that the humanities can teach us about reality that science can't would be how to parse up this particular question. There seems to be an assumption behind the question that like the highest achievement that man can reach is to somehow grasp reality, and that's not exactly what the humanities are about. They're about representing reality.
Yeah.
Although I do think that there are things, like Amy pointed out, that science and art and the humanities do share. I think we have pretty much the same delight when we go into an archive and we find a document that totally changes our view of something. It's rare, but it happens. And we like scientists, we like to peek around the corner a little bit. We like to speculate. And then go out and see if we can find something that confirms it or challenges those speculations. I think that there's a lot of commonality there.
So you're going through a similar process of science that scientists do.
Yeah.
When
it's done well. When it's done well.
Yeah, and Amy talked about that too. Even with making art, you're going through that similar sort of process that scientists do.
I'm going to jump in and say that I'm a little confused by the question. Can the humanities teach us something that science cannot? Well, I wish I had a neuroscientist up here, because I'm sure that there's research that's been done in terms of emotions and how it affects the brain. So I would think that there would be science in how humans react when they see things. Mm-hmm. I also think that there's a lot to be said for communication using art, and that a lot of us who are lay people, myself included, that don't really understand the hard science and might be scared away from the specific studies and the arguments that are very highbrow. I think that art can allow the rest of us to engage in the scientific discussion. So perhaps I think of it more as a tool than as something that's specifically separate from.
I think that's a good, pragmatic.
Yeah. I think as far as physical reality, well, studying that, we're going to let you do that.
Yeah.
No one was ever writing a poem and then accidentally, oh look, I split an atom. Isn't that cool?
I don't know. Feynman may have been playing the bongos when he figured out some physics there. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. Could have happened.
Causation or correlation, not causation.
So it would have to be reality in broader terms, and the experience of reality, as people have been experiencing reality for years. I think more than 10 now. People have been experiencing reality. I'm not sure.
Yeah, for at least 6,000.
Are you a really young Earth creationist? Like you're a 10-year creationist?
I don't want to go make any really bold claims, but and so obviously history looks into things like that, and arts, the way it's been expressed, the way people have experienced reality, what they thought was important, what they thought was interesting, and so that's a valid way of, I think, looking at the world too.
In fact, Amy, you were saying that you wanted a neuroscientist up here, and there's actually.
I just like them. Do we have any? Neuroscientists are cool.
Hang out with them.
Possibly with some fun equipment.
Yeah.
Yep. But the sciences do seem to be kind of influencing what can be done in the humanities. There's an entire field of study known as neurophilosophy. Now that we have a better understanding of say, mirror neurons, you know, what does that have to say about human creativity? What does that have to say about the old Greek principle of mimesis, of imitation? I mean, just that, it changes things. And if you're doing something, I mean, I'm not sure that good work in the humanities will ever overturn science. But then again, I don't think it's trying to. There are some people who did try to do that.
The French in the 60s.
You know, yeah, the postmodernists, or you know, like a radical feminist view of science as raping nature.
When we talk about, we can just talk about postmodernism in general. I mean, we don't have to, but just how that can.
Can we just put neuro in front of it and have
neuro postmodernism? When we talk about,
not talk about it anymore.
The Sokol affair, and how easy it is for frequently postmodernists, and it's still around, unfortunately. It never seems to go away. They will adopt the terminology of science without knowing, or they probably know what it means, but in order to further their argument, even though it's pure nonsense.
Well,
and that's how the Sokol affair was.
A lot of posturing in postmodernism.
You think?
And yeah, yeah, they appropriate science words in order to assume the authority of science. I mean, it's a rhetorical move.
Yeah.
But when pressed, they can't explain what they're talking about, and I find that very frustrating. I think that part of the bad rep that the humanities have gotten in science circles has to do with the fact that there is this small number of fringe cultural theorists who are willing to appropriate the language of science and just expound mindlessly on it. And
aren't they dead now, though?
Huh?
Aren't they all dead?
No, I mean, it still gets taught in...
like zombie
Are there like
theory.
Derrida zombies?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
They come out and they want your brains, but in a really irritating way.
In a really
talking and talking.
In a neuropretentious way?
And then you just want to take it out yourself and just throw it at them. Sorry.
I'm trying to stop this war.
Can I deflect us from postmodernism for
Please
a second
do.
and say that I think a lot of the humanities and the arts are about sort of holding up a mirror to ourselves and drawing our attention, is holding up a mirror to us as a sort of collective and drawing our attention to something in the way, and by doing that, I don't know where I'm going with this. We know that we can only pay attention as human beings. We can only pay attention to so much at once, and I think there's a collective way of doing this too. The humanities can draw our attention to a certain thing that we might find is important for some reason. It can suggest a question that science might ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that also some of the literature nerds in the audience, I think, would understand this, but I think I can explain it in a way that is pretty easy to understand. There's a difference between the cultural philosophy kind of postmodernism and the literary kind of postmodernism. Yeah. And in literary postmodernism, it is.
You don't have to. We can stop talking about this.
I think it speaks to what you're saying, Hai-Ting, because it's kind of a scientific process. So, for example, in
you want to define? That's the problem.
Yeah, postmodernism is defined as that which cannot be defined.
Yeah.
It's actually deconstruction. Someone
there you go.
Blame Brian for continuing this discussion, please, because we don't want to talk about postmodernism.
Well,
Isn't it? It's also kind of the anti-modernism knocking down the idea that there is progression towards something greater.
Right.
Sure.
There's the idea that there's...
In cultural theory, there's this idea that the meaning of a word or some type of cultural symbol is not really contained within it, but it is defined by a series of negations.
What is
and
that?
therefore you can make.
It means nothing.
I know. It's all meaning is it's extrinsic. The intrinsic meaning is extrinsic, and
What does
just
that even mean?
And ultimately, all language deconstructs into meaninglessness.
and if you
As
if,
I believe
really
we've proven here
depressing.
today. Thank you.
That makes me want to be an artist.
But you can pull back from that and talk about context, like general semantics, which is the idea that it's a mistake in communication to assume that the map equals the territory. In other words, a map is not the land that it represents. It's a representation of that land. A word is not the idea it represents.
Right.
It's a symbol for that idea. And this is very important, I think, for anybody who's interested in communication, to not assume that everybody has the same ideas attached to the same symbols.
That relates to art very well.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was trying to get at when I said that art cannot tell you truth. If you think that you know a certain truth, you're going to see that in the art. And the art cannot directly instruct you about a different truth. It might suggest to you some other. And that sort of comes back to the idea of art being a sort of mirror that can draw your attention in one direction or another, and then science can study in that direction to search out whether we're right about it, but it's not, art is not there to
Do you think
show
there's
you
a,
the truth or tell
do you
It
you.
can
think that
inspire
applies-
you to think.
confirmation bias in art sometimes?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Have you
Definitely.
seen
There-
that
But
in your practice?
But you're allowed to.
I mean, do you think it's always a good thing, or always bad things? Or, but that goes back to the tribal issue too.
You know,
which
I
can be a
think-
good community building thing.
Yeah.
One of the problems that, at least in like my graduate training, was that we didn't draw attention to the fact that there was something called confirmation bias. In fact, in all of the one of the things Eve and I are working on is a writing textbook, and I looked through the Modern Language Association database for the phrase confirmation bias, and it appeared
Good
once in the entire database. It's just not on the radar. And one of the, when we're training someone to do an interpretation of a novel, often you're finding someone just picking out of Moby Dick 5 or 6 passages and saying, this is my case. And you need to, that's discarding a lot of data, right?
Well, I mean, that can be valid if you're not
Right.
then saying, and therefore the whole novel means this. But I mean, you can pick out a small part of
Conclusion
and discuss that part of
based
it.
cherry picking.
Well, we can all continue this discussion outside, and we're out of time. We
Really?
did not come to physical violence, which was good.
Well, not yet.
If anybody's interested, though, I guess maybe like downstairs, like outside the conference area, please, if you're going to come to
Can I
blows.
say one thing really fast?
Yes, one thing. really-
In closing, I just want to encourage anyone out there in the audience that has a skill that they can lend to the fight, with skepticism, to get out there and do it. That if skepticism is really going to be a valuable tool that will encourage the progress of humankind, then this community is going to have to find ways to speak to our emotions as well as our intellects. Okay, guys?
So be active, no matter how.
Do stuff.
One last.
Bob,
And I would like, if somebody here is an educator who is using extraordinary topics in their classes in the sciences or in the arts, I'm currently working on the Swift blog to assemble work that you're doing in blog format. So if you could kind of find me or look up my email or look at my website or whatever.
Yeah, we're looking for that for randy.org. So
Absolutely.
find-
Bob will be outside having a fight after this.
Yes.
So just find him.
All right. Well,
And-
thanks.
And
Thanks to all our-
I think
oh, sorry.
we will sell this bottle and its accompanying
Is there alcohol in
percussion
it?
Yeah, we'll
instrument.
donate the
There
money
is
back to
no
the
beer
JREF.
left in this bottle at Amy's table, and we'll donate the money
money.
to the JREF. So if you're interested, come by.
Okay,
Awesome.
thanks to Amy, Hai-Ting, Miranda, Eve, and Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And I was pretty embarrassing too, because just before this panel, Hai-Ting and I were talking about what she was going to do, and it turns out we were going to be singing the exact same song. So
It's awkward. Go ahead, Brian.
I just decided instead I would sing Poisons, Every Rose Has Its Thorn. Speaking of wonderful art, let's get some definitions out of the way before we get started with the meat of the panel. I don't know if everybody here even knows exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about the humanities, to paraphrase Raymond Carver. So, Bob, do you want to handle just explaining to us what exactly we are talking about here when we say humanities?
Well, when I think of the humanities, the definition is a little fluid, as these things often are. But it's a variety of disciplines that have to do with, communication and meaning, often, including, literature and languages and linguistics, philology, cultural anthropology, depending on your definition of the social sciences, the fine arts, history, theology is a legitimate area of study. Apologetics, but theology is interdisciplinary. And then there are area studies that are also incorporated under the umbrella name of the humanities, including things like gender studies.
You don't have to believe in it for it to be true. My name is Hai-Ting. I am an opera singer by trade. That song had lyrics by Surly Amy. You can buy them on a not on a beer bottle, but on a necklace. I mean, I suppose if someone wants to buy this beer bottle,
That's actually a good idea. I might work that in.
We will
Collector's item now.
donate the proceeds to the JREF.
Yeah.
That music was written by my partner in crime, Matthew Schickley, who is out there somewhere, last night at about 2 a.m. Right, I am Hai-Ting Chinn. I am an opera singer. I podcast with Matthew Schickley, the Scopes Monkey Choir, which is a podcast about Scopes Monkey Choir, which is about it is the podcast where music and sound meet science and skepticism. And I have an ongoing show that I'm calling Science Fair, which is science texts and writings by scientists set to music and staged with demonstrations.
Excellent.
If you take the first names of the people on the next panel, you can make an anagram sentence, but just barely. So Amy, Miranda, Robert, Eve, Hai-Ting, and Brian becomes I hit a bear, avenge my arm, Brit, or Din. Please welcome Amy Davis Roth, Miranda Celeste Hale, Robert Blaskiewicz, Eve Siebert, Hai-Ting Chinn, and Brian Thompson. We got Skepticism and the Humanities.
Hello, everybody. Oh, we didn't assign seats beforehand, and I was hoping there would be a fight, but apparently not. Hi, I'm Brian Thompson. I am the outreach coordinator for the James Randi Educational Foundation, and this is a panel on skepticism and the humanities. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things, so we'll get started pretty quickly. Just so you know, I woke up this morning feeling completely upside down after the festivities of last night. So I'm wearing my Australian skeptic.
And Shakespeare, because something fun and modern. I blog at skepticalhumanities.com. I'm interested in things like creationist interpretations of Beowulf, which you'll be surprised to learn are wrong. And I'm actually wearing, this is a Grendel's skull. Amy might not have realized this, but...
Yeah, I have no idea what I do, you guys. So.
Because it turns out Grendel was a
these
dinosaur. And yeah, anyway, next.
I'm Bob Blaskiewicz. I'm a postdoc in the Writing and Communication program at Georgia Tech for about 2 more weeks. Then I'll be going to Wisconsin, where I'll take up a visiting assistant professorship. I'm also at Skeptical Humanities. My PhD is in American literature and rhetoric and composition. My dissertation was on the World War II veterans' writings, both memoir and fiction. And I teach a number of classes that take as their subject extraordinary claims, giving students the opportunity to write about these topics and to research these topics on their own.
Science.
It's a Victoria Skeptics t-shirt, and actually now I feel right side up. Do you get it? This is the quality of jokes you're going to get this early in the morning. Thank you. I'm hearing mumbles of support from these people. So let's just go down the row and everybody can introduce themselves. Let's start with Amy.
Hi everyone, I am Amy Davis Roth. A lot of you know me as Surly Amy. I write for skeptic.org. Thanks for the 5 supporters out there. I'm also the managing editor for madartlab.com, which is a blog about the intersection between art, science, skepticism, and geek culture. And I'm the creator of Surly Ramics. Thanks, guys.
I'm actually going now because she's got a special introduction.
Oh, of course, yes.
I'm Miranda Celeste Hale. I am
Like,
oh, how do I do it?
is it?
Okay. I'm Miranda Celeste Hale. I'm an English teacher. I teach primarily rhetoric and composition courses at the community college level. And I tend to focus on applying those skills to skeptical activism. And I guess that's the relevant part. This panel. Thank you.
I'm Siebert. I'm also an English teacher. I have a PhD in English literature, specifically Old English, Middle English, Old North.